It's real. It's real. You know the deal. You know the deal. Come on.
Hey, Shanté.
And I'm Natalie, and welcome to What's the Deal, a podcast powered by the Norfus firm. At this Norfus firm, we solve people problems, and we have the great pleasure of working with employers all around the world on HR and DEI initiatives. Wow, we are here. That's really exciting. Took a little bit of, work,
Finagling to try to figure
but
out
we
how to.
arrived. How are you doing?
I'm okay. I'm doing all right. I feel pretty good. I can't complain. Yeah, we're getting into the spring. So, I mean, we live in Florida, in Miami, so it's always, nice down here, except in the summer where it gets brutal. But still, it's been mild, which is actually really nice before
Yes.
the heat comes in. So, yeah, it's cool.
Yeah.
How
And
are
we were
you?
in Seattle over the weekend, and that
Mm,
was cold and damp.
yeah.
And TJ and I were like, so when are we going back to Miami? So it's great to be back here in the warmth, but seems like we're in a little bit of a dumpster fire. I don't even know how we describe 2025 in the US, other than that. And
I can't keep
so,
up.
right. That is such an interest. I mean, I think that's such a great segue into like our upcoming episodes of I can't keep up because it's hard. There are so many things every time you could open your phone, even if you were just trying to send a friend a text, right? Like there is so many things that could occupy your attention these days. And so when we apply that to what we do, which is the workplace, I know I'm here today to say I was wrong about something. Mainly, you can't talk about politics at work, and you shouldn't. Literally, 4 months ago, we did an episode where I said, "Don't do it."
And
And
was
let me just say I was
adamant
wrong.
about it. Was real strong with it. 10
I
toes
was
down.
strong and wrong, as it turns out, and I'm certainly not above admitting I was wrong. And maybe you could tell the folks why I was wrong.
Well, I see. You know how I feel about judgment, right? So I don't know if I like to categorize things as right or wrong or good or bad. I mean, some things, but I don't. In this instance, I don't know if that's the right label for it. But I think just where you were at the time, you were of the position that you shouldn't speak about politics at work, just because you know how inflammatory it can be. Like it can really set people, on their heels and really at odds with each other, and that doesn't lead to any sort of productive workplace environment. So I think that you were just trying to be like really protective of the integrity of the workplace, right? And just be like, just guys, don't do it, right? But again, people are human, and we know that folks have a need to express themselves and who they are, and political identity is very much tied to who people see themselves as. And so it's hard for folks to not voice an opinion when it relates to politics, especially in this climate with how we're just inundated with it all day, every day. And
Everything's
so everything
political.
is political, and so you can't avoid it, right? And I think that's what we're going to get into today. So kind of like walking it back a little bit, but again, I wouldn't categorize it as wrong. It was just like, listen, it's probably a best practice, but something that may not be
I
practical
would
in
say
this
if
in this day and age.
I'm going to take Shantae's lead of reframing this as it's an outdated best
There we
practice,
go.
right? I mean, I think if we think about at least pre 2025, we there was a lot more of a distinction between what was political and what wasn't, right? So my advice made sense at some point because you could make a clean line between, a political view and a work view and right? There was a lot more clarity on what was what. But I think we're in a space now where we don't really know what is what, or we can say pretty much everything is political at this point, which is unfortunate because I think for those nerds who loved social studies like me back in the day, we know that political does not mean everything. So,
Hmm.
but that's the new definition, I suppose, right? And so when we think about what we're trying to accomplish today, it's a two-part show, right? So the first is the why around. Why we can't avoid politics at work. And our second episode will be how do you deal with that, like the how of tackling that issue. Um, so why, I mean, we've kind of touched on it already, but like, why can't we avoid the political discussions at work?
As we mentioned, it's everything's political. People's identities are tied to it. Um, we can't avoid it in general in the work. Like everything, literally everything is political. We're constantly being inundated in what's going on in the government, what's happening with this president and this administration, and so. But the things that are coming up aren't typical political issues. Again, a lot of what's coming up right now is related to people's other identities and other demographics. So they can't help but have an opinion on it because a lot of it feels like an attack or an affront to people. So you can't help it. You can't avoid it.
Yeah, I mean, you think about it. It's. I mean, we could take many different examples, but I think one that certainly threatens people's safety and livelihood in a lot of ways is, the very strict stance on immigration, right? And
Right.
so, you look at, for example, being in Miami, and it is, a large swath of Cuban Americans are very much supportive of the current president, but now they're being subject to removal. And that's the technical term for being deported. I hate to be such a nerd, but the term deportation kind of left a long, long time ago, but nobody realizes that. So when I say removal, I probably sound like the weird one. But in any event, if you think about that dynamic of this is the president you wanted and then that president doesn't want you, and then everybody who's around in that sort of adjacent group, like, oh my gosh, am I going to get removed or deported or picked up by ICE? And you're hearing about people who won't leave their house because they're afraid or won't send their children to school. That's one swath of people, right? And it's not just Cubans, but we're in Miami, so that is relevant to where we are. Obviously, this cuts across all ethnicities and backgrounds in terms of the immigration piece. Then you think about what we were talking about yesterday when we were getting ready for today. If we think about the listening sessions we do when we do workplace culture assessments and the types of things that people talk about in those groups, right? Before 2025, we would have never even thought twice about those conversations. But now we have, an executive order that attempted to ban DEI, and the EEOC is going after companies. And like now it's like these conversations that were perfectly normal and legal are now like political, and you're like, wait, what is this,
Right. Right.
So like a normal work conversation now is actually a political conversation somehow.
Exactly. So then what does no politics really mean then? Like in this current environment, like we're thinking about like how do we, if we want to avoid it, like because I know employers would rather not, right? Because it's just, but how do we do that to the point where everything you just said, right, is coming up as it relates to people, how they feel safe and how they show up in the world? Is there such a thing as no politics?
Is there such a thing as no politics? Is there?
I don't
No.
think so.
Yeah.
So is that futile then? That seems like it's a futile kind of like argument or position for folks to take, because how do
You would basically be saying don't talk about anything at work.
Right. Basically.
And lightweight, depending on what you do for a living, you might not be able to talk about work at work, right? Like if you were to take it to its full, like logical conclusion, which obviously highlights how preposterous this whole thing is, right? Like it's totally outrageous that we're even having to have this conversation because we're supposed to be the land of the free and free speech and all these different things that are getting everything.
But isn't free speech conditional?
Oh, it is. It's always been conditional, right? Like the government's not supposed to be able to direct your speech or limit it in certain ways, which it's clearly trying to do right now. I mean, like, it's like really we're in bizarro world, if we're just honest, right? Like up is down, down is up, red is green, like it's like, and actually was talking to somebody about this yesterday during an appointment I had. And he was just like trying to make sense out of life because he wants to move, and him and his wife want to move, and he's like, I mean, it's just there's not enough clarity on like what to do, and that's unfortunate, right? Because like, who wants to live in a thing? Well, do I buy a house? Do I sell a house? Is the interest rate going to go up or down or sideways? Is owning something a real thing anymore? Right? There's all that. It's sort of that existentialism on all of it.
Yeah.
So I think, one of the things that's like really important to be thoughtful of here is, I mean, I know we sound like a broken record, and we'll talk about this more in the next episode, but you've got to understand what's happening with your employees today. Like, we're not even in a position anymore where you can rely on an engagement survey from 6 months ago, right?
No.
I mean,
No, because it changes so fast. Again, every day something is they coming up with something else, and it's like, what? First of all, what are y'all doing? First, second of all, what am I supposed to do with this? Like, I don't even know what I'm supposed to do. So that because that cycle has sped up so fast, right? It's you have to check in more often with your people because who knows what's about to blow up tomorrow or what's about to come out in the news 3 days from now, right? Like you don't know, and you're constantly getting those hits that throw you off, right? And so you got to process it in some way, shape, or form, and unfortunately, it's something that you can't really disconnect on when you go to work.
Yeah, and I mean, the reality of like why this is important is that, again, we still have workplaces, right? Like people still have to go to work every day. They still have to make paychecks because, again, like we still have to pay for the stuff we need. Like that's still clear, right? Out of all of this, like if you want food, you have to pay for it.
Right.
Even if you have your own land, you got to pay for the stuff to plant on it, right? So I think this is important because the world hasn't stopped, right? Things are still moving in there is sort of the normal things that we still have to do every day. Wake up, take a shower, hopefully have a place to live, all those different pieces of it. And I think that if there's any doubt about the fact that the workplace has then changed dramatically just in the past 90 days, you'd be remiss. And so I think there's like a lot of signs of that. I talk about this a lot, but the types of complaints that I'm getting are getting even more nuanced, right? Like folks are just sick of it, and they were sick of it before, we had this current administration. People were sick of stuff already, right? Like that part was already there. We've talked about this before. Like employers were already struggling. Yeah. Before the most recent election, before the most recent, administration, like employers were still already trying to figure it out. Now you got to start again because it is a whole new world.
Yeah. Yeah. So you have to do a reset there. Like what you thought worked in the past. And again, we'll get into that in the next episode. What you thought worked in the past in order to support employees. I mean, it's a whole new world. It's a brave new world out here. So
gosh, that was my favorite book in high school. Like, I didn't even think it was true, but it's true, right? Like, it was I remember I was on the metro in DC taking a train to school, and I'd be in that book like, really? What? And you're like, oh yeah, really?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Exactly. So it sounds like all of this is unavoidable. Right? Like employers, you can't get away from it. You can't put your head in the sand. You can't ostrich. You can't say, you put up any sort of policy that says, no, don't do this, right? Like you can't do it. So, but people still try, right? Like employers still, or anyone really is still trying to like corral people and into like a space where you have to keep it within the swim lanes at work, right? You can't talk about these things, or you shouldn't talk about these things. It's not polite. It's not all those things. So, but what happens if you do try to shut it down? What happens if you try to avoid the conversation?
The resistance creates bigger problems, right? I mean, you and I have been talking about this a lot more generally, right? Like when you resist the flow, it's harder, right? So when you're seeing it, and again, this is to me why it's been harder for employers all this time, right? Your people are telling you what they need and they want, and you continue to do what you think makes more sense than what people are telling you that they want. So I think that part is not new. Like resisting what is makes life harder.
In general, I really appreciate you framing it that way because, yeah, when we buck up against something and we try to fight it, it does. It makes it harder, and it takes longer to get through whatever you need to get through. So just deal with it.
And since a lot of companies, obviously folks are still trying to make sense out of the term DEI, and some companies we've seen already are shifting to the term just inclusion, right? They're dropping the other two letters. If you're thinking about inclusion and you're in this Pandora's box of everything's political, how the heck do you choose what people can and cannot talk about without invariably excluding a certain group? Like, how would you even go about, what are you going to do? Like, put all the issues people could talk about and be like, this one, yes, that one, no, this one, you know what I mean? It's like, that seems very unproductive, in my opinion.
So, kind of as an aside, as you were talking about like who can talk about what and who gets allowed to have a voice or perspective that gets shared, I think what we've seen often, actually in these last few years, is folks who have a maybe more left leaning perspective, a more maybe typically aligned with Democratic type politics, right? Especially in the work that we do, tend to be the loudest voices in the room.
Yeah.
Right. And then there are others who maybe swing a little bit more center to right, that may not see things exactly the same way. But oftentimes what we've heard, one-offs, right? Not necessarily in the space that we're holding, but like maybe off to the side, they didn't feel comfortable sharing that opinion. And so, yes, we're talking about this within the context of politics, saying that politics, everything's political now. Like, how do you create a space for that? We're talking about conversations that people can have and creating a container around that. Like, how do people even get a chance to be able to voice that in a way that doesn't leave people feeling like, oh my goodness, I can't talk about these things, or I'm going to be judged, or I'm going to be, all of that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that raises you've just hit the point, right? Like, because folks who are more like in the middle or maybe right leaning feel excluded from these discussions because they get the impression that their colleagues are more left leaning, or maybe they get the impression that leaders are more left leaning. And I think that, you can see how that happens, right? People do make a lot of assumptions. Like, I was talking to, a friend and her wife who are both immigrants, and like the wife was explaining how she thought it was so like predictable that another Latin American person that she voted the same way he voted, right? Like, it was just an assumption. Like, they were in the mailroom and he was like, wow, we won, right? And she's like, like, don't assume that's me. And it's like, it happens all the time, right? I might look at you and say, oh, you must be really into hip hop because you look like you would be into hip hop. And you're like, I don't even know what hip hop is, right? Like, I think it's like that piece of not judging a book by its cover is the first step, right? Like, not looking at all your colleagues and thinking they think like you. I think that's the first step of thinking about how do you create a container for folks to be okay at work. And I say okay because I think the charge that we see right now with folks that are especially on the more left leaning of like the sky is falling, it makes it hard for people to be open to other views. And so I wouldn't go so far as saying you must just open yourself up to views you don't agree with, because folks are in a lot of in trauma right now, right?
Yeah.
So that's not really realistic. But I do think it is realistic for folks to really try to take a step back and take a breath, because a lot of what we're seeing is intended to divide us. Mm-hmm. And if you start from that perspective of the intent here is for us to be fighting with each other, the intent here is for us to see one of us as evil and the other one as good. So then if you can accept that, like at least that, nothing, I'm not asking for much other than that, but that if you go back and you look through history, these tactics have been used in various ways across various empires and kingdoms and all of that to divide people. Then hopefully we can get back to like my whole premise on DEI from the beginning was we all have a lot more in common than we think we do, right? Because we were set up to be different from each other, right? Our differences have been called out from the beginning. So it creates this thing of like, I can't possibly have anything in common with someone who's in the KKK. How could I possibly? Well, I could possibly, right? I'm certain, like, even if it's that we like the same food. So I think if we can be thoughtful of the fact that as humans, there's a lot more that ties us and divides us, it at least can create a container for some basic level of respect, right?
Yeah.
I don't know what your thought is there. I just went off on a tangent, girl.
I appreciate the framing of that, because it's like, it's true though. automatically you go in this thinking you're going to fight someone. Like you already are, anything related to any of these topics, right? The political topics that we talked about, automatically, if someone even tries to suggest that they may have a slightly different perspective than you ready to jump on them. And so it's like, I love you being like, hey, like, let's bring it down, everybody. Let's just bring it down. And let's just, there is something that we can find that we like that's in common, right? And then maybe we can go from there. But to me, what comes out about with that is the trust building. That commonality, that common ground allows you to build trust with someone. And then in order to do that, then at some point, maybe you're able to have these bigger, broader, more challenging conversations. But it really does come down to a level of trust. And so with all of this, and if that's not there, if you aren't intentional about building that trust, these conversations are going to go awry.
Yeah, and I mean, look, to your point about like people are ready to fight. I mean, yesterday is a good example. We were trying out a new place and trying to find parking. And I'm like, all right, Shanté, you go get us a spot and I'll figure out the parking. And I didn't even tell you this happened. So I pull around to go to the valet and there's no directions, right? And that side street is a mess. We were hollering at folks driving dumb, right? Like it happened. And like the valet, I opened my window to just like signal that I'd like to park. And he's like, we can't take you from right there. You have to be in the line. And I'm like, what line? Like, this street is a mess. Like, where's the line? And I'm instantly like pissed. Like, do you know how long it took me to get just here because of the traffic and whatever? And then I'm like, so are you saying I have to drive back around the block? Yeah. What? Or you can make a U-turn and go park on the other side. And then I just rolled up my window because I was like, I'm gonna just ride around the block because I am annoyed. This is and this is like, think about that, how many times a day that happens on stuff that has nothing to do with work, right? Like,
Exactly.
Where you're like, are you really having this arbitrary rule? You telling me you don't see this whole street clumped up? Like, what line are you talking about? And where's the sign? Like, okay, never mind, right? Because it's like that multiplies out. Because I also have to be thoughtful of, this dude's just trying to get off work. He had his lunch bag in his hand. Like, he's not trying to fight with a customer. Like, when he's off the clock, Nat, like, go drive around the corner. Like, but think about that. I think that also brings this to sort of, I think, a final point here about this is about self-awareness. Mm-hmm. Like, you should really, now is a really great time if you haven't done it yet, over the 50,000 times we've recommended it, to see where you stand on things, right? Because myself, being able to see myself, like, are you really going to get into an argument with someone trying to get off work? Like, right. Just when you're still in your car and you can drive around the block? I mean, no, just drive around the block. It is frustrating, and that's a valid feeling, but it's also not that deep. Yeah. And so I'm able to see that in myself and say, right, let me pick these battles. Yes. Right. I also have a teenager who keeps me in check. When I start to get impatient, he's like, you're being really impatient, mommy. Okay, thank you. And I appreciate the feedback because I'm receptive to it. I feel it, and you're right. And I don't want to show up this way, right? So it's like, I think if we're tying this all the way back from the beginning, what we're saying is the way in which the world has changed in the past 90 days is so super dramatic that we are really literally in a position where just about anything is political at work. So we can't avoid the conversations. We'll get into in our next episode how to be thoughtful of the conversations, right? We're not also suggesting you have to invite them, but we just have to be thoughtful of how, what does political mean now? Also, where we are in the world is designed to divide us. So if we could just pause long enough to understand, like, you really want to be in a fight with everybody all the time? I mean, using my valet parking example, like, is it really that deep? What is that deep, right? Take stock of what's that deep for you and your company.
And I want to add in there, it may be that deep, but there's time and place, right? Like, your work doesn't necessarily always have to be related to your activism or those things that you really want to, like, go hard on an issue on. There's a time and a place. Maybe there's another place, another organization, something where that is more appropriate. Let's just be mindful of that. Again, not saying that you don't do it, not for employers, not saying to encourage it, but just be thoughtful about where you are and what you're saying.
Well, what I love about what Shanté is saying is, like, create some containers, y'all. Like, letting everything spill into everything is a blob. And that makes you feel very unanchored. So, like, some of this is let me focus on work at work, some of it, right? And my personal activism can take place outside of work, right? And or inside, but understanding sort of the ramifications of that for you. And then finally, coming back to you is this is the most important time to be self-aware, right? Like, what is it that you stand for? Where does that fit in the different containers in your life? How do you want to show up? How are you showing up? Have you solicited feedback from anybody recently? Is anyone talking to you about how they're receiving you, and is that how you want to be received? Right. So, we're in a time now where pausing and being thoughtful and mindful is the most valuable skill set that you could have right now. Right. And so in our next episode, we'll talk about how to conquer this new world of everything is political. Of course, we love having you. We're always welcoming your views and what you want to hear. You can find us at thenorfusfirm.com/podcast, on Instagram, on TikTok, on YouTube, on LinkedIn, on all the things. Come check us out, and we'll see you again soon.
Bye.
Here it is. Diversity, equity, inclusion, and leadership. That's the deal when you know what you're dealing with.